As we look at this passage today, I'd like us to start the same way we did last week. I'd like to invite you guys to read this portion of James. James chapter 2, we're going to be looking at verse 14 to 26. It's the last half of the chapter. And I'd like you to just gather around with the people around you and read it, however you choose to do it. Last week there were some folks who alternated reading a verse at a time. Maybe you want to read it all to the group that you're with, but I'm inviting you to gather up into groups and to read James chapter 2, verses 14 to 26. I'll give you time to do it now. I've got a new competing favorite noise at church now. Like, there's three from my top. One of my top sounds at church is the sound of kids, all right? And then the other is the sound of greeting and fellowship. And then the other is this sound of bunches of groups reading aloud God's Word. I'm not sure which is my favorite. It probably alternates depending on which one I'm hearing right then. But this passage is probably not a new passage to you. If you're familiar with any of James as a book, you're probably familiar with this portion. I would say it's one of the most well-known portions of the book. But again, just like we looked last week, it's probably not a terribly confusing passage, okay? Maybe a little more than last week, but we're probably not all just completely stumped as to what we're supposed to do with what we're reading, okay? But before we get into what it does say, I do want to make sure we address a regular accusation for this passage. Pretty often, people will try and build up this argument where if you read certain sections of Paul's writings and certain sections of James's writings, it seems like they're saying some different things. Like you can find a few passages where Paul says, it's faith alone, right? Only faith, right? And then you read over here and it's like faith and works, and it seems like that's kind of at odds with each other, that it's a faith versus works. But the best illustration that I've ever seen in my mind for what's actually happening, Jeremy, could I ask you to be my helper? I'm sorry, you're on the front row. I apologize. So if you could just stand here and face that way, and then I'll stand here and face this way. That's what Paul and James are doing. They're standing back to back, addressing different difficulties and errors that were happening within the church. Some people were over here and they were saying, it's faith, but faith plus. It's faith, but you also need to convert to Judaism. Or, it's faith, but you also need to obey, kosher dietary laws. Or, it's faith, but you also have to get a membership to this gym. That's not one that actually came up, but, that kind of an idea, faith plus. So Paul is fighting against that. He's writing aggressively against that error. And James is over here, and he is addressing an error where people were saying, well, it can't be just faith, right? Yeah, it can be just faith. I believe. I believe. I believe. And James sees that, and he is fighting against that. And he says, are you kidding me? What kind of faith is that? What kind of faith is do-nothing faith? And so they're not against each other. They're with each other against error. Thank you very much, Jeremy. I appreciate it. You did very good. We couldn't have done that better if we had planned it. That was amazing. All right, so that's something that I want us to make sure that we address. Like it can be a challenge, especially if you've been studying through some portions of Paul's writings and then you immediately jump over to James. It can seem kind of faith versus worksy. But if you read what's happening here, I think it becomes very clear that that's not exactly the issue that James is talking about. It's faith and works. It's not faith versus works. It's faith and works. You see, a little tidbit about me. I'm colorblind, okay? And so I'm not fully colorblind, and often, usually, when I say I'm colorblind, I get hit with a barrage of what color is this, what color is that, what color is this, right? And so I'm not sure why I would pretend to be colorblind, but people are often very curious about it. And I'm not severely colorblind, and I'm not fully colorblind, but I'm colorblind. And one of the ways that my family knew that there may be an issue is that when I was a kid and I was in coloring class, I would color trees all the same color. The tree, the bark, the leaves, everything. It was just all one color. And so my mom always sort of questioned this. See, we didn't discover that I was colorblind until I was in high school. But when we did, she was like, oh, I think she just thought I was an idiot beforehand. Like, I'm not sure. She wasn't mean. I'm putting words into her mouth. I apologize. That was mean. But she was like, oh, like I didn't understand matching clothes and things like that. And I tell you all this to say, we now live in a place, if you'd ever told me this was going to happen, I would have thought that seems far too magnificent to ever be reality. But we live in a place right now where I can go out into my yard and I can get a mango. I have a mango tree in my yard. And you're like, what does that have to do with being colorblind? Do you know how I know it's a mango tree? I pull a mango from it. I know it's a mango tree because it grows mangoes. Now that is a pretty high science bar, right? I mean, like that is litmus test of litmus tests. This is a big deal. It grows mangoes. I bet it's a mango tree. James says you should be able to do the same thing with the fruit of faith. Of course it's a Christian. Look at the fruit. Of course they're a Christian. Look at the fruit. Now, that mango tree, much to my chagrin, does not always have mangoes, right? I can't always go out to the mango tree and pull a mango, but at certain times of the year, which I'm still yet to really understand when, I can go out and pull a mango from the tree. So the fruit's not always there, but it is regularly there, okay? Of course they're a Christian. Look at the fruit. Of course he's a Christian. Remember when he. Of course she's a Christian. Remember that she did such and such and such and such. James says you should be able to tell the tree by the fruit. And the fruit of faith is works. James is never painting a picture that says works is more important than faith. But he's saying faith that never has a work is a worthless faith. That's what he's saying. It's not real faith. We walked through, I don't remember, was it Chattahoochee that we walked through the warehouse with all the plants? Yeah, okay. And so we're walking through Chattahoochee Market, and we're in this place that I'd never been in my entire life, and I was like, all of a sudden I'm in a jungle. And we're walking through, and I'm like, holy moly. And I asked Tyler, I said, are these plants real? And she said, no. And I was like, well, that makes sense because we're in a warehouse, and it was like, I was not real sure how it would happen. It was fake plants. That's the kind of faith that doesn't have works. It's fake. It's false. It's not worth the same thing as real faith. We could be done, but let's look at it, okay? First off, it starts and it says, saying the right thing isn't everything. Saying the right thing isn't everything. He says, what good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed or hungry, and one of you says, go in peace, be warmed, be filled, without giving them food or clothing, what good is that? So also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. Go! Be warmed, be filled, but not by me. God will supply, but not from me. Now, here's one error that I want us to make sure we hear. You ready? No one in this room can address every need. Right? No one can address every need, but all of us can address a need. Okay? No one can do everything, but all of us can do something. Okay? One of the most challenging passages in the New Testament to me is Jesus praying in John 17, and he says, I have accomplished everything you sent me to accomplish. And if you read a few chapters before that, it talks about how he went to towns and he wasn't healing very many people there because they didn't believe. Or he didn't heal everyone there. Or he didn't do this. And there were towns that Jesus didn't even visit. Everything? Because he accomplished everything that God the Father said, do this. That's our goal. It's not do everything. It's do the things that we're called to. Do what we're led by the Spirit to do. But we will all be led to do something. Faith without works is dead. Saying the right thing alone is worthless because talk by itself is cheap. A fruitless tree shows something is wrong. If this time next year you say, Jonathan, I remember that time you said something about a mango tree in your yard. How have the mangoes been? And I say, you know what? It hasn't produced one mango in 12 months. A whole year. I remember the last mango I ate, and it was so delicious. But in a whole year, it hasn't produced one mango. Do you know what we're going to understand about that tree at that point? There's something wrong with the tree. Right? Because I did some calculations, and if you go through a whole year, you've gone through every season. I just did those calculations on the spot. And if you go through every season and it doesn't produce any fruit, there's something wrong with the tree. A fruitless tree shows there's something wrong with the tree. And a workless faith shows there's something wrong as well. Now, here you go. Which work is James talking about? Which work are you supposed to do? Is there a particular work he's looking for? What about the work of speaking? Are we all supposed to speak? What about the work of Sunday school teaching? What about the work of helping someone who's hungry? What about the work of clothing someone who is poorly clothed? What about those work? Is it a particular work? No. It's works. It's works. There must be work present because the root of faith produces the fruit of work. Talk alone is cheap. Now, is it important to say the right thing? If you're a parent in this room right now, how important is it for your children to say what they're supposed to say? Is it important? It's important, right? Now, if it stops there, it's dramatically less important, right? But if it's attached with the right action, saying the right thing is important. It's good to say the right thing. But talk alone is cheap. So we have to go from saying the right thing to showing our belief. And this is really where James lands in this passage. It says, James gives this hypothetical argument. He says, but someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe there is one God, that God is one, you do well. And it goes on to say, even the demons in hell believe that God is one. Okay? So saying the right thing isn't enough. You've got to show your belief. In Titus, Paul is writing to one of his spiritual sons, and he says, Titus, the people there where you're at, they profess to know God with their mouths, but they deny Him by their works. Their actions betray their belief. You see, belief is something that must be shown. This is one of the areas where English does a poor job for us, okay? Because no one reading the Greek would divorce the idea of just simply intellectually believing something from the act of acting on it, from the truth of acting on it, okay? So we're limited because we're reading in English in this portion, and we're limited because we're post-Enlightenment. You see, the Enlightenment period, if we go back in our history lessons, we realized that we got to a point where we realized, you know what? I can sit in this room and I can know a lot. I could surround myself with books and know even more and more. I could get a pen and some paper and know all over that paper. And just know. I can just know. Because it's post-Enlightenment. All throughout history before that, we understood that knowing and doing go hand in hand. Belief and action go hand in hand. There's a Dallas Willard quote. If some of you might have read some Dallas Willard, he's got a few big tomes of stuff that's hard to understand some of it, but this is really good. I like it. He says, we don't believe something by merely saying we believe it. Okay? I believe. That's not when we believe it. Or even when we believe that we believe it. This one's a little harder. I believe it. I believe it. But we believe something when we act as if it were true. And this weekend, God set me up with the most appropriate illustration for this that I've ever experienced. You see, I have a child who enjoys the trampoline that's also in our yard. And I didn't know this was a thing, but he's been enjoying a back flop. You guys know what a back flop is? So he stands on the trampoline and he hurls himself backwards onto his back and then bounces up to his feet. And he's been challenging himself to break his own record for the number of consecutive back flops. Okay? This morning, I watched that child do 155 back flops while I was drinking my coffee. It was a sight to behold. And he came in and he said, Dad, I got to 155. His previous record was 150. I think he just stopped so he could keep striving later on. He said, I got to 155. I know, son. I was watching. That was amazing. I said, I've never been a real big trampoline guy. He said, you could do it. I said, You see, part of me wants to believe that trampoline can hold me. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't go out there and try a backflop. I didn't even go out there and step on the trampoline. So what did I really believe about that trampoline? Now, of course, we've got all of our adult filters on, right? Like I was drinking my coffee. Of course, I'm not going to jump on the trampoline, right? I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm not exactly the target demographic for trampolines, okay? And so maybe that's what I was thinking. But whatever the reason, I came to the conclusion that no matter what I say I believe about it, I wasn't willing to act on it. We believe something when we act as if it were true. When we act on it, when we go and take that step and live it out, and it affects our actions and what we do in our work. And we don't just say the right thing. We should. It's not enough to just say. And we don't just show. But God takes what we show and how we live out that faith, and He creates something that others can see. We need to have a seishosi faith. I made that word up. Seishosi. What kind of faith does James tell us we should have? We should have seishosi faith. Seishosi faith. What kind of faith should we have? Seishosi. I should say the right thing. It's important to have the right words, the right action. Colossians tells me that I should have speech that is seasoned with salt, that is appropriate for every conversation. I should say the right thing. But I shouldn't just stop there. I should have a seisho faith. Seisho. I should not just say, I should also act on it and work it out and live it out. It should affect what I do and say and think. Because others will see. And God will use that to draw. For as apart from the Spirit, for as the body apart from the Spirit is dead, also faith apart from works is dead. Okay? Because listen to me, folks. They're seeing whatever we're showing. When we show that we don't actually believe, they see it. And when we show that we actually believe, they see it. It's seen. It clearly communicates. It communicates more amplified messages than the best words alone ever could. What do they see? Actions speak louder than words. What I do, attached with what I say, but what I do will either mute or magnify what I say. My actions will mute or magnify my message. James says, there's really no such thing as true believing faith that stays only faith. True believing faith blossoms into work, into action, into living out what we say we believe. And God, in His magnificence, uses those things as tools to help draw and help call attention to Himself. So I've got 3 questions for us to consider as we think about James chapter 2, 14 to 26. First, how often am I content to just say the right thing? Guys, I feel like all my life I was expected to know the right answer. I was raised as a pastor's kid. Okay? In Sunday school, in school, we were in a small town. Everybody knew I was a pastor's kid. So even in school, in math class, they expected me to have the right answer because he's the pastor's kid, right? What sense does that make? None. Not one bit of sense, right? But I was expected to know what to say. And now, there's times when I know what to say. Am I content to just say the right thing? Am I content to say it and leave it there? Is it enough? James says we shouldn't be content with just saying the right thing. Think about your life, and when have you witnessed someone showing faithfulness in their actions, that they worked alongside their faith? And how did it affect you? Can you think of an example of that? I'll give you a second. Think of someone that lived out their faith. How did that affect you? I think it's a byproduct of human condition, but for some reason, we find it very difficult to make a transition from this happened and it affected me to when I do, I can affect others. Do you have struggles? That's a combination of struggles and trouble. All right? It's a new word. I'm making new words up all over the place today. Do you ever struggle with making that transition? Like you remember, I remember when they did that, and man, it helped my faith. It helped me grow. It helped me understand. It helped me learn more. It helped me live better. But then I don't remember that I might be able to be that help to those around me. I might be able to be the person that someone else can go. Now, is that why we should do it? Everybody say the right answer. No, that's not why we should do it, right? But it can be a good byproduct. It can be a helpful thing. When have I witnessed someone showing faithfulness in their actions, and how did it affect me? And then make that transition to realize you can be that person for someone else. And then as we look at our actions, our life, our works, how am I inviting others to see Jesus in my words and actions? How are my words and actions inviting people to think more about my Jesus, to consider more my Jesus? How are my actions pulling people to that crossroad of faith? Because our actions should. They should be pointing to Jesus. I'm enjoying studying James. I've been in James. Here we're in James, and at another church where I'm able to speak sometimes we're in James. And so evidently, I'm supposed to learn something from James right now, because it's the place where I am studying a lot right now. And as I think about this passage specifically, about faith and works, faith without works is dead, I've been thinking a lot about a conversation in Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9 has one of my favorite prayers in the whole Bible. Jesus and his disciples are traveling around, and they meet a dad who has a son who's struggling. And this dad comes to Jesus and tells him about what's happening and asks him for help. And Jesus asks a question which is it's a hard question, but Jesus was good at hard questions. And he says, "Do you believe that I can do this? Do you believe that this is possible?" And that dad's prayer was, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." And so for me right now, as I think through the content of the book of James, I'm confronted with these things that I know I should believe, that I say I believe. And so my prayer right now has been repeatedly throughout this book as I've been studying it, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." Because when I'm not acting on it, I'm showing unbelief. And when I'm not saying it, I'm showing unbelief. And when people see my life and it creates this dissonance between what I say I believe and what I'm acting like I believe, it's unbelief. And so my prayer has been an echo of that father's prayer in Mark chapter 9. "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." Because when we truly believe, James says, and God says, we will show it. Father, would you take us in this room, and would you draw us to yourself, and would you build us up in our faith and help us to walk with you in our faith to the point where people see more and more clearly you in us. That they would see you in our actions and not just our words. And that they would see us and know that you are a God who saves broken people, and you can save them too. In Jesus' name, amen.